Chapter 40. The mob attacks Moses. Suddenly the mob closed in, pressing the guards against the underpinning of the platform. A few small stones shot out of the crowd and bounced off the platform aimed at Moses, Aaron, Joshua, and Caleb. Those who attempted to hurl heavier stones were hampered by the surging mass of human beings. A few men managed to squirm past the guards and climb onto the platform. They crouched around the four figures who were already there, eyeing them threateningly. It was evident that these intruders were waiting for more men to join them for the purpose of seizing Caleb, Joshua, Moses, and Aaron. At that instant, a blinding flash came from the inside of the tabernacle. Even though the curtains of the structure veiled its full brilliance, the brightness was so intense that people were temporarily blinded. A moment later, an ear-splitting roar rumbled out of the tabernacle. The ground quaked as though a whole mountain had been dropped from the sky. The aggressors staggered off the platform and into the struggling mass surrounding it. The words, "Stone them," abruptly ceased from the crowd. The only sounds now were those of alarm and the frantic scramble to draw back from the platform and the tabernacle. Realizing that God had intervened, Moses and Aaron gave thanks and got to their feet. "Have the 10 traitorous scouts arrested and brought to my tent," Moses instructed Joshua and Caleb. "I must go now to the tabernacle to talk with God." At the tabernacle, God asked Moses after he had knelt inside the tabernacle, "How much longer will these people vex me with their evil ways? How many more signs must I give them to prove that I mean what I say? Now I should have nothing more to do with them except to blot them out of my sight forever. Then, starting with you, Moses, I shall build up a greater and mightier nation." Here is where the course of history would have been greatly changed. If Moses had let his vanity get the best of him, with Israel wiped out, Moses would have claimed Abraham's place as the father of nations. "But if you destroy all Israel," Moses replied, "the Egyptians shall hear of it. In fact, every nation on earth will sooner or later know of it. Word has spread that you are the kind of God who dwells with his people, and who leads them with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. When news goes abroad that your people died in the desert, the nations will believe that you lack the power to bring them safely into the land you had promised them. I beg you, God, to forgive these people of their sins, but I'm not asking you to let go unpunished those who have stirred the people into wanting to return to Egypt instead of going on to the promised land of Canaan." There was a silence. It was painful to Moses, who couldn't be certain how God would respond. He realized that his mentioning the preserving of God's reputation in the eyes of other nations, especially Egypt, wasn't necessarily a strong point. God, with his perfect memory and awareness, wasn't in need of being reminded. And finally the Creator replied, "Because you have prayed as you have for the Israelites, I shall forgive their sins as a nation. I shall not make a complete end of them. My reputation for mercy and power and glory will one day be known in every nation of the world." Numbers chapter 14 verses 11 through 21. Moses was greatly relieved and heartened to hear the words from the Creator. He remained for a little while with his forehead to the ground. But just as he raised his head and was about to utter his deep thanks, God's voice boomed out at him again. "I have just told you that I am willing to forgive the sins of the Israelites. At the same time, however, I will refuse them entrance into the promised land because they have broken their covenant with me. This means those who have rebelled against me shall never come into Canaan. They shall die in the desert. This curse does not apply to those who are under 20 years of age, the very ones whose fathers complained that they would surely die in the desert because I couldn't protect them. Neither does it apply to obedient people such as Joshua and Caleb. But it does mean that most of Israel shall wander 40 years in the mountains and deserts before reaching the land they have refused and hated. That is 1 year for every day required for the scouts to search Canaan." "But we have already spent about 1.5 years coming to Canaan," Moses said. "Do you mean that we are to spend 40 years going to a place that is only a few hours away?" "Inasmuch as you have already been nearly 2 years on this journey," God replied, "it will require a full 38 more years. That is my judgment on Israel because of their rebellion." Numbers chapter 14 verses 22 through 35. Just a few minutes previously, Moses had felt as though a great weight had been lifted from him when he was assured that the people would not be suddenly blotted out. Now the dismal outlook of 38 years of leading the Israelites was something he could scarcely face. "Where must we go from here?" Moses inquired wearily. "You must leave tomorrow and start southward." Told by God to carry this depressing information to the people, Moses and Aaron returned to the platform. A vast murmuring throng was still present. Joshua and Caleb hurried to join Moses and Aaron. "The 10 scouts slain." "We didn't have to arrest the 10 scouts, sir," Joshua reported, pointing to a knot of people crowded around something on the ground. "They're all dead." "Dead?" Moses repeated in surprise. "How could it be that all of them would die at the same time?" "We couldn't find it out," Caleb explained. "Just a little while ago they were seen talking together over there, and an instant later they were lifeless on the ground." Moses quickly realized that God had taken their lives because of their false reports. But there wasn't time just then to be concerned about the scouts and their families. Moses had to tell the people at once what was in store for them. Numbers chapter 14 verses 36 through 38. When he passed on to them what God had spoken, the people received the startling news with mixed emotions. Some were speechless. Others moaned and loudly complained. A small part of them were jubilant because of the hope of returning all the way to Egypt. Most of them, sobered by the strange sudden death of the 10 scouts, were quite shaken up by the outlook for their future. Many thought God wasn't fair. Only a fraction of them were willing to admit to themselves that by their bad conduct they had spoiled a wonderful future and had brought hardship down on their own children. "Remember," Moses concluded, "that from now on we no longer have the priceless blessing of God's guidance and protection. We are like a flock without a shepherd, and only yesterday God wanted us to go into Canaan. If we had obeyed, God would have scattered any Canaanite who might have tried to prevent us. But now we don't even dare stay here lest the people over in those mountains to the north come down and slaughter us. Be ready at dawn, therefore, to move south." Rebels plot by night. That night was a restless one for Israel. The more the people thought about God's ruling to turn back, the more they wondered how they could make up for their sins. In fact, certain ones secretly met to plan what to do and how to organize the people into doing it. Meanwhile, the Israelites were not the only ones aware of their blazing all-night campfires. Alert and unfriendly eyes were peering down from the mountain heights to the north, watching to see what the horde of people in the desert valley would do next. Moses, too, was restless. He spent much of the night in thought and prayer, and very early in the morning he was dropped asleep from exhaustion, only to be waken up by Joshua. "The people are breaking camp already," Joshua exclaimed. "It isn't even daybreak, but there are rumors that thousands are leaving." Moses stepped out of his tent. Most of the campfires were burning low at this hour, and it wasn't possible in the dense pre-dawn darkness to see exactly what was taking place. But in the still, cool air came the faint jangle of metal and the voices of men shouting commands to their shepherd dogs. Moses knew the sound well, and he sensed that a huge caravan was moving out. But why? And where was it headed? "Should we call every available officer to try to stop them?" Joshua asked. "No," Moses answered, shaking his head solemnly. "We're already in enough trouble without shedding blood amongst ourselves. Just try to find out where these early risers think they're going." Aaron joined Moses before Joshua could report back, and the light of dawn streamed in rapidly from the east, making plain to Moses and Aaron a long column of thousands of people with their flocks and herds slowly moving out of the camps. Moses was hopeful that he would discover the column moving through a passage to the south, the direction in which God had said they should go. To Moses' dismay, the light of dawn showed that the wide line of people was moving north. This was the road to Canaan. This was the way these people had refused to take only a few hours before. Having been warned not to go in that direction, thousands of Israelites were now disobeying by sneaking off that way this very moment. "The Amalekites and Canaanites are just beyond that mountain," Moses exclaimed, clapping his hands to his head. "Probably they're armed and waiting for them. This could mean a terrible slaughter for all those poor people." Moses and those with him watched in discouragement as the thousands of Israelites and their flocks dwindled from sight in the distant pass. "Even if all the rest of our armed men went after them," Moses said, shaking his head, "it wouldn't make much difference. God will not protect those who have departed, nor those who would go to their rescue." Numbers chapter 14 verses 40 through 43. Moses then instructed his officers to see that the tabernacle was packed and ready to move, that the people should start breaking camp at once. He knew there was a possibility that their enemies, undoubtedly hidden in the mountains, would stage an attack on the camp. Before the sun was very high, the remaining greater part of the Israelites was moving through the passages to the south. Many a person left Kadesh before he wanted to. However, thousands had hoped to remain long enough to receive some word of what had happened to friends and relatives who had departed towards Canaan. Meanwhile, the Canaan-bound Israelites, in their plotting flocks and herds, were close to the top of the pass that led northward from Kadesh. Rebels are ambushed. Suddenly, hundreds of armed men leaped out from behind the trailside boulders, shouting as though demented. They came running at the startled Israelites with spears and swords. Hundreds of Israelites died even before they could get their weapons ready for action. Shrieking women and children turned and tried to run back down the trail, only to trip helplessly over one another. To add to the confusion, the herd stampeded and the flock swarmed wildly in all directions. The main body of Israelites gradually began to move backward. But by now, the great number of the enemy, Canaanites and Amalekites, had almost sealed off their retreat by thronging behind the agitated column of Israelites. The Israelites had walked squarely into a vast death trap. The slaughter that resulted was frightful. Even animals fell by the sword and spear, though most of them escaped into the mountains. The people were not so fortunate, and within only minutes the pass was littered with the bodies of men and women. But because their numbers were so much greater than those of their ambushers, part of them escaped and fled back toward Kadesh. The Amalekites and Canaanites took after them, pursuing some for quite a distance to the south. Most of those who escaped hid among the rocks until the enemy was gone. Then they set out to try to catch up with the main body of Israelites that had departed to the south from Kadesh. At about sundown, the Israelites made camp a few miles southwest of Kadesh. Hours later, when most of the campfires were either out or very low, there was great excitement from the north side of camp. Weary, footsore escapees were beginning to arrive. Many who returned needed their wounds dressed, and some more of them died. Others gave horrifying accounts of the bloody affair,